Hello. In this lecture, which draws on a Leverhulme-funded project of writing a feminist genealogy of photomathographies, I trace events in the process of becoming a human natural philosopher and mathematician. My narrative inquiry revolves around the archive of Amélie de Châtelet. The legacy of de Châtelet's writings and ideas can be rediscovered only slowly, Ruth Hagengruber has argued, and it is genealogical events in the history of gender and science that the excavation of de Châtelet's archive will trace and illuminate. But first, some context about the project, which started in September 2022 with the following question. How can we think differently about the problem that well into the 21st century, women are still marginalized in mathematical sciences? Conceptualized as a genealogy, or what Foucault would call a history of the present, the project focuses on 6 women in the 18th and 19th century Europe, and through a narrative inquiry of their ego documents, as well as their philosophical and literary writings, it raises the following questions. What is the present of women in mathematics? How has this present been historically constituted? How can they become other? Becoming as a process of events is therefore at the heart of this project. Over the years, my scholarship, research, and publications have revolved around the project of writing genealogies of women's constitution as modern subjects in the areas of education, art, work, and more recently, forced displacement. I have written extensively about genealogy as a theoretical lens, as well as a methodological approach in sociocultural analysis of gendered subjectivities. As a theoretical and methodological approach, genealogy in the philosophical work of Michel Foucault investigates the processes, procedures, and apparatuses whereby truth and knowledge are produced. Genealogy writes the history of the present. It problematizes the multiple, complex, and non-linear configurations of the socio-political and cultural formations of modernity. In the context of this research project, what were the conditions of possibility for women to be excluded from the world of mathematical sciences? How were they historically constituted as subjects of scientific knowledge? And why are they still in the margins of this discipline as students, teachers, or researchers? Genealogy as a method of analysis looks into the archive to excavate events which might throw light in the practice and discourses that have excluded and marginalized women from the field of mathematical sciences. But instead of seeing history as a continuous development of an ideal schema, genealogy searches in the maze of dispersed events to trace discontinuities, but also unexpected continuities. Women's ambivalent position in the world of mathematical sciences is a paradigmatic case of uneven historical developments, particularly if we consider that Laura Bassi was the first woman to hold a chair in physics in 1732, and it then took more than 150 years for Sofia Kovalevskaya to be appointed professor of mathematics at Stockholm University in 1884. What happened in between, and why women's position in mathematics is still at a sore state in the 21st century. The question of what is our present today is challenging, since the now of our inquiries has already become past even before the question has been raised. And yet it is our inability to see, let alone grasp or address unfolding events, that makes the search for the event so urgent. It is therefore in the lacuna of facing the event that we find ourselves today as thinkers, political actors, educators, acting and thinking in the remains, or shall we say the ruins of modernity. The time has come to grapple with the untimely, align with the rhythms of the cosmos we thought we had understood, and let ourselves drift in the processes within which events emerge. It is the event that I therefore find at the heart of my current research project of writing a feminist automathography. In this backdrop, how can we perceive fleeting raptures, unexpected decisions and movements, unforeseeable encounters, and how can we include them in the toolboxes of our inquiries and analytical practices? Moreover, what does it mean to think and act with the event? What are its epistemological conditions of possibility, as well as its ethico-political effects? Can we imagine event-related research methodologies? These are some of the challenges emerging from such inquiries, which have already started mapping new planes of consistency. For philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead, the world is made of events and nothing but events, happenings rather than things, verbs rather than nouns, processes rather than substances. This conceptualization of process and the event at the heart of reality of the cosmos goes back to the Stoics and their distinction between bodies and events, incorporeal effects of the interrelation of bodies. Departing from good sense, the event sticks out from the ordinary, marks historical discontinuities, and opens up the future to a series of differentiations. An event is a point at which existing laws change and new ones are created. In this light, an event is an opening onto the possible, and even if this possibility is not realized, it will nevertheless persist into the future, preserved in the unconscious of individuals and society. In this light, the event is not just something that happens. Rather, it is something that makes new things happen, disturbing the order of what we do, the certainty of how we perceive the world and ourselves. Philosophers of the event have seen it as a glimpse into the unreachable, the yet to come, a transgression of the limitations of the possible, a flash in the grayness of the virtual worlds that surround us. As Gilles Deleuze has poetically put it, and I quote, "The event is not what occurs, an accident. It is rather inside what occurs, the purely expressed. It signals and awaits us. It is what must be understood, willed, and represented in that which occurs." End of quote. Working diffractively with these philosophical approaches, I have found Foucault's take of genealogy as eventalization particularly pertinent for a genealogy of gender and science. Eventalization is a different approach to the ways traditional historians have dealt with the notion of the event. It begins with the interrogation of certain evidences in our culture about how things should be. This breach of self-evidences also requires a rethinking of the various power relations that a certain historical moment decisively influenced the way things were socially and historically established. This means that the genealogist does not regard singularity as simply an isolated piece of data to be added to their documents. The event under scrutiny is to be analyzed within the matrix of discursive and material practices that have given rise to its existence, but also in the light of its effects in the historical course and the historical imagination. As the genealogical turn to the past can never reach an origin, it rather encounters numberless beginnings. An important task of the genealogist is to identify points of emergence, critical historical moments when dissonant events erupt in the course and discourse of history. Emergence refers then to a particular historical moment when things appeared as events on the stage of history. It is in the context of intense power relations at play that Foucault re-stabilizes this moment of arising. In this light, emergence is not the effect of individual tactics, but an event, an episode in a non-linear historical process. The analysis of emergence is not about why, but about how things happened. It is about scrutinizing the complex and multifarious processes that surround the emergence of the event. It is thus to Amélie du Châtelet as an event in the entangled histories of gender and science that I now turn. Amélie du Châtelet was a French philosopher, physicist, and mathematician. Her work covers various philosophical and scientific disciplines, including epistemology, ethics, and politics, natural philosophy, metaphysics, physics, language, and religion. Her philosophy attempts to reconcile Leibnizian and Newtonian physics in her major work, Institutions de Physique, Foundations of Physics, which was circulated widely, generated heated debates, and was republished and translated into several other languages 2 years after its original publication in 1740. Du Châtelet participated in the famous Vis Viva Living Forces debate concerning the best way to measure the force of a body and the best means of thinking about conservation principles. She attacked the discourse that the education of women should be based on the idea of fulfilling and complementing the will of men, criticized society for excluding women, and castigated nationalist interests in science. Her ideas were represented in the most famous text of the French Enlightenment, the Encyclopédie of Diderot and d'Alembert, first published shortly after her death. Her vast scientific output demonstrates that du Châtelet was a unique and independent mind that contributed impressively to philosophy and science. Numerous biographies, books, and plays have been written about her life and work in the 2 centuries since her death. Having conceptualized the emergence of Amélie du Châtelet as a pure event, I will now excavate some historical phenomena or emergencies in the process of my genealogical investigation. Du Châtelet was born in Paris on December 17, 1706, and was the daughter of one of the highest-ranking aristocratic families in France. She spent her childhood at Hôtel d'Angot, number 12, Place Royale, today called the Place de Vosges, in the famous Marais neighborhood of Paris. From her childhood, she was praised for her talent and was acclaimed as a girl genius in the salon of her father, Baron de Breteuil. In the root of heteropatriarchal normativity, Du Châtelet married Florent Claude Marquis du Châtelet-Laumont, a colonel in one of the king's regiments and son of one of the oldest aristocratic families in Lorraine, when she was only 19. She went on to have 3 children. Her daughter Gabrielle Pauline, born in 1726, her first son Florent Louis in 1727, and finally her second son François Victor in 1733. And yet something unexpected erupted in her otherwise aristocratic life and fate. In the same year that her second son was born, Du Châtelet met Voltaire and started taking lessons in mathematics by Pierre-Louis Moreau de Maupertuis, a mathematician and member of the Académie Royale des Sciences, Académie Française, and the Royal Society. They began a lifelong intellectual friendship, but Châtelet's influence on her former tutor, particularly in relation to his turn to Leibniz, has only recently started to be discussed and documented. Her second son, François Victor, died in August 1734, while earlier in the same year, Voltaire had taken up residence at Du Châtelet's chateau at Cirey, which eventually became a famous center of scholarship and a major destination for mathematicians, writers, and philosophers from throughout Europe. It was closer to a mini academy than to the kind of salons women often ran in this historical period. In the autumn of 1735, Francesco Algarotti, a prominent Italian mathematician and scholar, visited Du Châtelet and Voltaire at Cirey for 6 weeks. But when Algarotti published his Newtonismo per le dame, Newtonianism for the ladies, following his stay at Cirey in 1737, the frontispiece of the book depicts Du Châtelet as the recipient of the author's teaching and helped to shape the discourse of Du Châtelet's future reputation as a mere translator and expositor of Newton's ideas, while it is now evident that not only was she one of the 3 most important Newtonians in France, alongside Voltaire and Maupertuis, but that she also made important interventions, bringing together Newton's and Leibniz's ideas in an original critical synthesis of her own. In 1736, Voltaire began work on his Éléments de la philosophie de Newton with Du Châtelet's assistance, and the frontispiece of his book, published in 1738, depicts Du Châtelet holding a mirror to reflect the light from Newton down to the author Voltaire, contributing to her reputation as an expositor of Newton rather than a philosophe. Duchâtelet was around 28 years old when she realized that she might be able to undertake some academic writing of her own. She describes this as follows in the introduction to the preface of the translation to the Fable of the Bees, and I quote here. I am convinced that many women are either ignorant of their talents because of the flaws in their education, or bury them out of prejudice and for lack of a bold spirit. What I have experienced myself confirms me in this opinion. Chance led me to become acquainted with men of letters. I gained their friendship, and I saw with extreme surprise that they valued this amity. I began to believe that I was a thinking creature. End of quote. On 23rd of August 1737, Duchâtelet anonymously submitted her essay on the nature and propagation of fire for a prize essay competition at the Académie Royale des Sciences. She did not win the 1738 essay prize, but her work was published anonymously by the Academy in a volume with 5 other submissions, Voltaire's included. Her entry was also anonymously noted in the Journal des Revues and publicly reviewed in Desfontaine's Observations sur les écrits modernes. In 1738, she published a review of Voltaire's Elements anonymously in the Journal des Savants, but until then, her occupation with science was indirect or private. The dissertation on fire is the first independently written paper from Duchâtelet at a time when she wanted to give voice to her own opinions, but was shrouded in anonymity, as Keiki Kawashima has argued, pointing to the difficulties for women to write books on science in 19th century France and beyond. Moreover, Duchâtelet kept it in secret even from Voltaire, because he did not agree with his scientific argument that fire had weight, and he had also submitted a paper for the same prize. And yet, her essay's publication in the proceedings of the French Academy clearly demonstrates how much prestige Duchâtelet earned with her writing, even though she was judged differently and often became the target of gender biases and defaming reviews. When women write science, there are 2 options. If their works are bad, they are ridiculed. If they are good, they are taken away from them, and they are left with nothing but ridiculousness of claiming to be their authors, wrote Marie d'Arconville, a pioneer in the field of chemistry, in an unpublished paper, where she explained why she decided to publish her work anonymously or under a male name until the very end of her life. Beginning with a review of Voltaire's Elements, Duchâtelet started publishing. Reading this review and her impressions of Algarotti's book in her correspondence, we clearly see that while she appreciated the dedication and the portrait, she was not satisfied with the scientific merit of their works. Duchâtelet wanted to give voice to her own opinion. However, before the success of her Institution de Physique, she remained shrouded in anonymity. Thus, the institution was a crucial turning point for her as an illuminator of science. Du Châtelet had probably planned the dissertation on fire before she realized the success of institutions and then published it after the success of the latter book in the Republic of Letters. Between the submission of the dissertation on fire in 1737 and its publication by the Academy in 1739, Du Châtelet's scientific views had changed regarding the force of a moving body. She had converted from the momentum school of Newton or Descartes to the vis viva school of Leibniz. While in the submitted essay to the Academy, she had praised a paper of the Momentum School written by Tartu de Merin in 1728, she asked to modify her approval at the time of the printing, but the Academy rejected her request, although she was able to have it inserted as errata. She also criticized Merin's position in chapter 21 of her Foundations of Physics, first published in 1740. Although the Foundations of Physics were published anonymously, Merin wrote an angry letter of objection, stating that it had been written by a female living, giving just the first letter of the place she read, so that readers could guess its author. Du Châtelet then wrote a rebuttal response to his letter, and those letters became the correspondence. In 1742, Du Châtelet published the second edition of her Foundations of Physics. This edition was published under her own name and included her debate with de Merin on vis viva and an important frontispiece with her portrait. In 1743, the second edition of the Foundations of Physics was fully translated into German and published in Halle and Leipzig. But the title was changed to The Doctrine of Nature that the Marquis de Châtelet gave to her son. In the same year, the second edition of the Foundations was fully translated into Italian and published in Venice. The Italian title was closer to the original, but still kept the subtitle that the work was written for her son. In 1745, Du Châtelet was included in the fourth volume of the Portrait Gallery of Contemporary Authors famous for their learning. She was one of the 4 women among a total of 100 scholars believed to represent the best of Europe's minds. On September 10, 1749, at the Palace of Luneville in Lorraine, Du Châtelet died as a result of complications with the birth of her daughter, Stanislas Adelaide. She had managed to finish her Newton just before giving birth. It is at the same time that she was madly in love with Marquis de Saint-Lambert, as their amorous correspondence, which has been preserved, shows. And yet this entanglement of the amorous correspondence with the completion of her important work on Newton, Principes Mathématiques, has not been seen, read, or analyzed as what I configure as an assemblage of love and mathematics. In their article, May 68 did not take place, written for La Nouvelle Littéraire in 1984, the Lesengatari have argued that if we look at important historical phenomena, and I quote here, there is always one part of the event that is irreducible to any social determinism or to causal chains, end of quote. They also add that historians are usually unhappy to admit any lack of causality, and what they do in their work is, and I quote again, to restore causalities after the fact, end of quote. This ex post facto causality is what the Lesengatari castigate. And I quote again, yet the event is itself a splitting off from or a breaking with causality. It is a bifurcation, a deviation with respect to laws, an unstable condition which opens up a new field of the possible. End of quote. Chatelet's engagement with science is more of the order of a pure event, free of all normal or normative causality. Its history is, a quote, a series of amplified instabilities and fluctuations, end of quote. Her marriage, the death of her second son, her encounter with Voltaire, the need to literally hide in Cireh. There were, and I quote, a lot of agitations, gesticulations, slogans, ideoses, illusions, end of quote, in the short storyline of her scientific entanglements. But this is not what counts. What counts is what amounted to a visionary phenomenon, as if a woman had suddenly felt what was intolerable in her life and also saw the possibility for something else. It is as if Chatelet had said to herself, and I quote, "Give me the possible, or else I'll suffocate." End of quote. In this backdrop, and I quote again, the possible does not pre-exist. It is created by the event. It is a question of life. The event creates a new existence. It produces a new subjectivity, new relations with the body, with time, sexuality, the immediate surroundings, with culture and work. End of quote. So, du Châtelet's engagement with science refers to something that interrupted normal or normative causality, what it meant to be a woman in her geographies and times. That is to say, what defines Châtelet's becoming is the fact that it interrupted the normal flow of things. This is what makes her becoming a scientist a pure event. It came out of nowhere in the sense that we cannot explain it by appealing to linear causalities. Of course, we can look at the conditions in which she lived and against which she rebelled, and we can look at the conditions of women in France at the time, which du Châtelet wanted to change, and which eventually led to her being engaged with mathematics. But none of this seems to adequately explain what happened. Châtelet's becoming is an event that is not to be explained by economic or political causality, but her attitude to life. However it happened, by whatever minute and repeated adjustments to the social causality in which we live. Du Châtelet and other women began to think of themselves, their relations to themselves and to others differently. And it is this subjective redeployment, as Deleuze and Guattari call it, this all too difficult to explain and non-historical change, that is the only explanation we have for Du Châtelet's becoming. So, although this new subjectivity must have come about through a series of subtle adjustments, it nevertheless explodes onto the scene, since it has no determinate economic or political cause. The minor adjustments that have led to this new subjectivity are imperceptible. Du Châtelet and other women scientists suddenly imagined and indeed demanded a society that would match their new subjectivity. Thank you.